Well, it's Friday and the storm is almost gone, but I hope that you're continuing to pray for those in the Bahamas and all along the coast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina and North Carolina that are experiencing the aftermath of the storm, the winds and the surges. We need to continue to remember, particularly the Bahamas, and the death toll is bound to rise with more than 4,000 people missing. So I want you to remember to continue to pray for that. Also, if you want to give, my suggestion is you give through Samaritan's Purse, which is a Billy Graham organization that's very effective in getting into these areas after disasters and ministering. And you know that the stewardship there will be good, and that there will also be a Christian impact with the help through Samaritan's Purse. So if you possibly can give, if you give money, that gives them the freedom of getting exactly what they need in those regions, whether it's building materials, food, water, whatever. Encourage you to give as you're able to give. And I know that some of you are on stretched budgets already, but if you have a little extra and you'd like to show some humanitarian support, that you'd pray about how much you should give, and that you'd give it through a good Christian organization so that they can help. We're in AD 29 and we have event 45. However, you could almost label this 45A and B because it's found in Matthew 16 verses 5 through 12, but it's also found in Mark chapter 8 verses 14 through 26. Now, the reason for the extra verses in Mark is that it actually covers two events as they cross over the Sea of Galilee again. That covers not only the lack of bringing bread, but it also covers the healing of a blind man, where Matthew does not cover the healing of the blind man. So we have the fact that they didn't bring any bread in two of the Gospels, but in the blind man healing, only one Gospel. So they have been over on the west side of the Sea of Galilee in Dalmatia, and they have crossed the Sea of Galilee again, and now they're on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and that's perhaps the widest part of the Sea of Galilee that they're crossing. And as they arrive, they find that they remember they have no bread. Now, if you read Matthew, it tells us that when Jesus says, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees," the word leaven kicked into their minds. We didn't bring any bread. And in the Mark account, it talks about beware the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod, which is not covered in Matthew. Nevertheless, their focus went immediately onto the fact that they brought no bread. And Jesus, knowing their minds and their discussion that they're having about probably whose fault it was that they didn't bring any bread. If there's more than one person involved, it's always the other guy's fault. So it would have been interesting to have been there during those days and to hear who was being blamed for the lack of bringing bread. Nevertheless, Jesus was pretty upset with them because he's warning them about the leaven, the evilness of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and Herod. And they're thinking about physical things, bread, and all concerned because they didn't bring any. And so he quickly reminds them that they should remember it hasn't been that long since they took 5 loaves and fed 5,000 and had 12 baskets left over. And they took 7 loaves and fed 4,000 and had 7 baskets left over. Now in Mark, it's actually posed as a question, how many baskets do we have left over to the disciples? And they answer 12 and 7. However, it's not covered in Matthew that they responded, but nevertheless, the discussion was the same. And he says something that he obviously remembers from all of the writings of the Old Testament and from stories passed down. If you have no eyes, do you not see? Do you have no ears that you not hear? And don't you understand what I'm really talking about here? It's not about bread. It's about the evilness of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and Herod. And as they're there in Bethsaida a blind man is brought, and this is covered only in Mark. And Jesus takes him out of the village. Obviously, he is trying to de-emphasize the healing so that the multitudes don't crowd him, and he's not so busy healing that he can't really bring the message that's an eternal message, which is salvation, the kingdom of God. Takes him out of the village, and he spits and places it on the man's eyes. And when he does, he says, "Do you see anything?" And we find that the man says, "I see men like trees walking." In other words, he didn't see clearly. So he laid his hands again on the blind man's eyes, and now he sees clearly. And he tells the man to go home, but not to enter back into the village again, I think, because he didn't want to have all of his time taken healing when that's a temporary kind of a thing. When he wants to talk about eternal things, the kingdom of God. Now, there's a couple of really funny things that happen here. One is that many preachers have preached messages about the healing of the blind, and they have a group of people that say that it needs to be one touch. Another one says it has to be spit. Another one says it has to be mud in the eye. And another one says it has to be two touches. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's spit, one touch, two touch, or just speak the word and the person is healed. Jesus can heal any way he wants to. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else could do much divine speculation on why this particular man required two touches. He didn't require mud, but he did require two touches, and I don't know that there's any significance other than don't put God in a box and think that he has to do something exactly the same way he did it last time. And I think that's a good, important lesson for us, and not to get broken up into groups saying it's got to be one touch, two touch, mud in the eye, whatever. The final thing that I want you to be aware of is in the Matthew account of the dealing of the Sadducees and the Pharisees and Herod. In verse 12 in the Matthew 16 account, it says, after he rebuked them for not remembering that bread was not an issue, he could provide all the bread they needed, but he wanted them to be aware of the evilness of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and Herod. It says in verse 12, they understood. After he rebuked them, after he clarified and said, don't worry about the bread, you've already seen that I can take care of bread, but I want you to be aware, because I'm not going to always be with you, the danger of the evil of the religious legalist, the religious that are trying to put a burden on people with laws that God never intended, and the false teachings of those Pharisees, Sadducees, and of course the evilness of those that don't believe at all, like Herod. And that's my thought for the day. This is Friday. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you remember to pray, and if you possibly can, give something for disaster relief in the Bahamas, particularly through the Billy Graham organization. I think it'll mean a lot for those people to see that we care, even though it was not in Florida, it was not in North Carolina, South Carolina, or Georgia. I think we should show our care, if we possibly can, with financial relief that will get the right goods into the hands of the people that need it with a Christian impact. God bless you. Have a good day and a good weekend.